Aloha and welcome. Today we are interviewing Cannabis Coach Shelly Eveland. Very exciting. Whether you call it cannabis or marijuana or the wacky weed or pot or devil's lettuce, by whatever name it goes, marijuana has a long and historied tradition in many different cultures, both as a spiritual herb and as a medicinal one. Recently in the United States, many states have made it legal to medicinally use marijuana, and it does have a broad breadth of things that it can do to help you with. One thing most people don't realize is there are many, many strains now. Back in the day, in the 60s or whenever it was introduced to the United States, there was only one strain, then there was two. Now there are dozens. So going into a cannabis dispensary can be very confusing and very expensive if you don't know what you're looking for. Then we have a cannabis coach like Shelly Eveland who could save you hundreds of dollars while helping you decide what you need and what you don't. She is not a doctor. She is a coach. She's not giving medical advice. Your doctor is the one who tells you whether or not you need it medicinally. However, unfortunately, most doctors don't know what the differences are between the strains or even what strains your local dispensary is using at the moment or selling. So I'm going to shut up and let Shelly speak. Shelly, how are you tonight?
Hi, very well, very well. How are you?
Very good, thank you. So tell us what a cannabis coach is.
Okay. A cannabis coach is that person who fills the gap between the time you get your medical card, and the time you actually decide to visit a dispensary to start experimenting and purchasing different types of strains or different types of methods. The cannabis coach can help you learn a little bit more about what's out there. The information that we have now is so much broader and more depth than what we've ever had before. So a cannabis coach can be that person who can give you basic general information about what you might be looking for, help you understand what different types of strains and terpenes and cannabinoids might help fill whatever particular needs you have, and also can help you understand some different ways that you can start experimenting for yourself, to start coming up with those just specific types of strains or terpenes that might work better for you. So that's the gap that I like to think that I felt.
So two questions. One is, what made you even think of this? Like, how did you become a cannabis coach? Like, what made you even consider it?
Yeah.
And the second is, what is a terpene?
Ah, okay. So the first question, I have experimented with cannabis like many people over the years. Um, Around 2014, I think it was, I ended up getting Lyme disease, got fibromyalgia. The Lyme disease kicked off arthritis. So I started experiencing a great deal of pain, and none of the doctors could actually recommend anything for me other than more pills. And I didn't really want to take that route. And since I had been experimenting with cannabis, I really was noticing that my pain levels were going down often. So I really decided that, if this is helping me, what else can it help with? So I started really doing my own research, and in doing so, I was amazed at all the different applications cannabis can address. And coincidentally, my daughter happened to be looking through some of those free magazines you get that are wellness magazines. You can get it, different health stores and that. And she came across an article that had an advertisement for the Natural Wellness Academy, and they were featuring their cannabis coach program. And it was one of the very first few cannabis coach programs that was out there. Um, and so I decided to look into it, and it was the first step down a path that I'm so very excited and I'm still on. So I signed up with LJ. She's the owner. She's basically who runs the program. And she got me hooked up with a mentor. So they automatically hook you up with a mentor. And I just did all my classes online. It was a reasonable priced certification, but she also was really good about giving you other opportunities for other certifications that. So I've been with the Natural Wellness Academy since ever since. So that's what got me there. And the more I learned, the more passionate I became. And the more money that I spent, the more I was like, I need to be able to learn for myself and
Mhm.
share this with other people so that I can help them on
That's
their path
awesome.
of potentially using cannabis. Um, and to answer your second question about terpenes, so terpenes are those substances that you find in nature. It's in plants, they're in fruits and vegetables and herbs. They're what give the plant the smell, the aroma,
Hmm.
and the taste and the scent. But they also have their own medicinal properties, which is what really started leading me even down another path of plant medicines. Because when I really started realizing how much cannabis could help, then it started really encouraging me to look at other different types of plants. And you'll find that terpenes are all around in the foods that we eat. That's why food is medicine in a lot of ways.
Yes, exactly.
Mm.
I did receive a question via email. Someone was asking if cannabis would be considered a hallucinogen, and if there are any types of cannabis that are hallucinogens.
Ah, um, I would say THC. So let me back up for a minute because you have THC and you have CBD. So those are the most well-known cannabinoids.
Hmm.
THC is the cannabinoid, which is well known for giving you that high, or that not necessarily
Yeah.
hallucinogenic effect, but you feel all of those things that you feel. And in some instances, for some people, it can be a hallucinogen to a degree. It
Hmm.
depends on so many things. You know, it could be the strain, the terpenes, the other cannabinoids could potentially cause someone. CBD is the other really well-known cannabinoid, which does not give you the high that you get. The receptors for CBD don't exist in the brain, so all of the receptors for CBD are all throughout your body and your organs. The CB1 receptors are the ones that THC locks into and causes that experience that you get. You get.
Wow, I did not know that. And I
Yeah.
have been taking CBD for a long time.
Mm. Yeah.
I take it for fibromyalgia and
Mm.
for the brain injury because when I take CBD, for me, it helps me to focus.
Absolutely.
And my friend
Absolutely.
had referred me to CBD because she takes it to go to sleep.
Yeah.
So we take the same kind and it'll make her relax and go to sleep and it makes me focus so I can get work done. So it's
Yeah.
really interesting how it works on different people's chemistry.
Absolutely. And you know, it's interesting because um, I found that in many cases, whenever I'm experimenting, I'll get a strain and then I'll try the strain and then I'll go and look up all the different reviews people put in for that particular strain. And
Mhm.
inevitably, I will see one who will say, "This makes me want to clean my whole house." And then I'll hear someone else say, "This made me sit on the couch and relax," which is something that I needed more than anything. So it really varies, and it's very. I feel it's very truly personalized medicine.
Mhm.
um, and there are different ways, you know, you can mix strains.
Mhm.
um, CBD also works even better if it has a slight bit of THC with it. And that's referred to as the entourage effect that you may have heard of, which
Mhm.
is how the plant terpenes and cannabinoids, you know, the THC and all the different limonene, you know, those are terpenes. Those all work together synergistically and in a way to give you certain effects as well.
So just out of curiosity, how many different strains do you typically see when you go into a dispensary? And how many different strains are there?
So that's a good question. I know that we have over 100 terpenes. I know there's over 100. Some have said up into the 200s when it comes to terpenes and cannabinoids. Some that we know very well, which is CBG and CBD and CBC, all those different things. When you go into a dispensary, it can vary. The dispensaries that I visit regularly, I would say that the strains, and again, they also separate them by flower or oils, vaporizers, tinctures. So they have all these different types of things that delivery methods, I'd call them. But on an average, I would say could be 30 to 40. And it varies, of course, across the United States because every state has different rules and regulations and different things that they allow people to sell, different things that,
Hmm.
so yeah, you can get up to 30, some of which you can get in both flower and you can also get them in vape pens. Um, you also have concentrates, which some of them look like little crystal rocks or butter, or really thick oils.
Hmm.
Even glass, it looks like glass where you use it with a particular type of like they call them an e-now or vaporizer. So yeah, it really varies.
And is there a type like I know some people prefer to smoke, some people prefer to vape, some people prefer tincture. So, what is the best delivery system, and is what dictates that preference, or is it more like what you need it to do for you?
I think it can be both. So, for instance, if you want something that's going to be and it have an immediate effect on you,
Hmm.
flour and a vape pen. If you've ever seen the vape pens, they usually come with what they call cartridges, and they
Yeah.
have like a concentrated oil in there. Um, those are ones that you'll definitely feel more immediately. Excuse me. Tinctures, and edibles. Those will take a little bit longer to feel the effects of, but they also last longer.
Oh, okay.
Um, yeah. The concentrates I found, um, they are, of course, what they're called concentrates. So they'll have higher levels of cannabinoids and terpenes in it. So
Hmm.
you get more with less. And my experience, and I've heard other people say the same things, is that the effect you get with that is cleaner than what you get with if you're smoking the flower. Um, yeah, and then they have pills, and then they have RSO oils, or Rick Simpson oil, which
Hmm.
is a more concentrated, more of a like a butter, thick oil that you can put in like peanut butter, or if you want to mix it
Oh.
with a honey, and those things are really highly concentrated terpene wise. And a lot of people use those for really major pain or really major diseases or issues that they're struggling with. Um, and the other thing that I also want to make sure everyone knows as well is that each state is different about what they suggest. So, for instance, in Pennsylvania, where I live, um, they will not recommend that you smoke flower. They recommend that you actually use it in a vaporizer. So they
Hmm.
have what they call dry herb or flower vaporizers, where
Hmm.
you basically grind up the flower and put it in, and what you're getting with that device is just a vapor. So you're not getting smoke.
Okay.
So yeah, so they say it's illegal actually, technically, in the state of Pennsylvania to smoke flower.
Which is
I
interesting because you are allowed to plant. You're allowed to have your own plants. So,
Yeah, but you're not allowed to grow cannabis in Pennsylvania.
oh, I
Um,
thought in Pennsylvania I had read that
yeah,
we were allowed to have a plant if we had the card. We could have a plant of our own, but you're not allowed over like X amount of plants and that kind of thing.
no, New York. I think New York definitely has just recently passed. They allow you to, but we're not yet allowed to grow.
Hmm.
Yeah, and it's so varied. It's so difficult to really keep straight, what the different states recommend and what they allow.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's weird. I think they should just like give it up across the board
Yeah, just stand it up,
because
give it up.
it can be used for so many different things.
Hmm.
Alcohol is legal, and that's really not good for much of anything except
Right.
numbing like your gums when your teeth are coming in. And it's there's so much many more uses of this. And we do have a question. I'm a former volunteer at a youth crisis intervention center from way back in the 70s. We used to do interventions and call outs to a local ER on drug overdoses. The only training we had about this was focused on THC. How does the potency of medical smoked leaf preparations compare to what was traditionally considered recreationally smoked marijuana?
Ah, that's such a good question and not an easy answer. Um, I would say that from what I understand, and this is also with a caveat that we really haven't had many opportunities to study the plant. Um, the potency is definitely much higher. I'd say what you probably were getting then, someone was probably, growing it in their field, in their, on their farm, in their house.
Your
Um,
backyard back in the
yeah, in
day?
their backyard. Yeah, yeah. And there's so many things that actually impact everything about the plant. So where you're growing it, what the climate is like, you know, what I guess maybe quality of seeds you have. There's so many things that impact that as well. But my understanding is that the potency is definitely much higher than it was then. I hope
Well,
that
because
answers.
now it's being bred for its potency,
Right.
whereas
Yeah.
then it was actually an actual weed,
Yeah.
which is where it gets its slang
Yes.
name.
Yes. Yeah. And now there's so many new innovative technologies, on how you can grow it. And a lot the thing that I've learned recently about, I'm always trying to keep up with, because this industry is so like on the cutting edge, and
Mhm.
there's so much to know every day. I learn more. Um, the phenotype is a new term that that's out there now, and that phenotype is really all about um, the climate you grow it in,
Mhm.
how you water it. Do you use regular water? Do you use distilled water? Like all those things, even the surrounding community, and other plants near it can impact. So it's so interesting because I had fooled myself into thinking early on that, oh, I'll just get all of these containers and I'll get the terpene profiles off of them. And if this one particular white widow, for instance, is the name of a
Mhm.
strain, if this white widow has all these different terpenes and cannabinoids, then I can just keep track of all these terpenes and cannabinoids, and I'll be able to help people by saying, oh, if you go get white widow, here are the terpenes you're going to have. Well, that's not true anymore because you could be growing it in the spring or in the fall there's just so many things that change it. I started realizing that you're not always going to get the same profile. You may get a similar profile, but
Mhm.
there's so many things that impact it. Yeah. So
Well, and because it is a plant, and plants
mhm,
are constantly changing, just like people are.
exactly.
They're an
Exactly.
organism.
Yep.
So,
Mhm.
knowing that, how difficult is it to find what works for you without spending a fortune?
Yeah. So the thing that I had to do a lot early was buy a lot of variety. If I could get a gram, which where I am in the state of Pennsylvania, a gram will run like $17 to $20. It's
So,
not a lot.
where are you in the state?
So I'm in between Philadelphia and Lancaster.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm in Coatesville. I live in South Coatesville, so it's right on the border of Westchester.
Mhm.
So I'm like
I was
30
just curious
minutes from
because we do have
Lancaster.
listeners out in Pittsburgh and then people in
Gotcha.
Delaware. And so where you are in the state would make a difference because I would assume going into like Philadelphia has stricter rules than being out in the boonies, I would think.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And they're all regulated by the state,
Hmm.
regardless. So they're all going to have some consistent regulations. What you get, what you have access to,
Hmm.
will be definitely differ. I visited my father up in New York, And right before I entered New York, up in that area, I checked out a dispensary up there. And when I went in there, they had like 10 strains that to choose from. And I didn't want to tell them, the number that I have access to on a regular basis. But that's what I've really had to do is I've had to experiment a lot.
Mhm.
What I've started to realize, and I'm this nerd that loves to keep information, so I started a spreadsheet for myself. So what I do is when I get a strain that particularly works for me, or
Mhm.
if I get a strain that particularly does not have a good effect for me, I keep track of the terpenes and the THC levels and the cannabinoids. And so over time, you'll start to see, oh, I'm starting to notice that these strains that have a lot of limonene in them, if I'm feeling anxious or if I'm particularly anxious, and I have those times where days I'm particularly anxious, I have to be careful that the strain that I'm using doesn't have a lot of limonene and a high THC percentage in it. So it's really all about being your own scientist, and just really being mindful when you're consuming. If all you want to do is sit down and consume, cannabis for relaxation or to have a good time, with your friends, like you might have a beer or, wine. If that's all you're looking for, that's not a problem. But if you're really trying to be careful, and that's the thing that I feel like has happened a lot with people is they've had bad experiences with cannabis because they don't really have any control over the strains that they're getting or the terpenes or the THC levels. If you're getting it off the street, you're getting whatever that person is giving you, and you're lucky if they know what the lineage is. So it's like a crapshoot for a lot of people, and they usually overconsume because they don't realize that less is more. So I always encourage people to be really careful about that. So I've had to just try a lot of different strains and really be mindful of, you know, what am I
So is
experiencing?
this why you would want a cannabis coach so that you don't spend thousands of dollars experimenting?
Exactly.
What would a cannabis coach like how do you help?
Yeah. So what I would do, which is based on the information that I learned through my program and all of my reading, and
Mhm.
I consume anything that I can get my hands on, that has any information, whether or not I'm not sure about the source or whether or not I am. Um, the thing that I find is that a cannabis coach can help you by sitting down with you and looking at what are your problems, what are you trying to solve for. So, and what are you taking, what medicines are you taking, because cannabis, it may or may not have a certain impact on you, but there are certain medicines that, the one thing that I've learned is, I'm sure you've heard how grapefruit, they suggest that you not eat or drink grapefruit with certain
Mhm.
medicines because it can magnify or amplify
Yeah.
the effect of that medicine. Maybe in some, it even negates your medicine, benefits. Cannabis is a little bit like that. Is that it can amplify medicines that you're already taking. So you have to be really careful. So that's why my biggest piece of advice for everyone is make sure that when you're experimenting that you're erring on the side of slow and low. You're trying low amounts and you're taking it slow and you're checking to see and test yourself for how you're responding. And the other thing that I've learned as well is warfarin, because one of the things that cannabis, THC specifically, does is it thins your blood.
Oh,
So you have to be really careful if you are taking any medicine for heart medicine, or I think warfarin is one of those because it is also a blood thinner. So those are the types of things you have to know. So I'm always trying to keep my finger on the pulse of interactions, because over time we're starting to build that knowledge base. Um,
so do you know of any types of especially mental issues where cannabis would be counterproductive, like ADHD or
okay, so this is the thing that I've really started to try to delve into a little bit more, because you really I'm starting to see, a plethora of information out there that people are wanting to say, oh, cannabis is really bad for heart health. Can cause people to have schizophrenia. There's a lot of things that are out there that aren't necessarily proven.
Hmm.
And 9 times out of 10, when I read those articles, they'll tell you all these things and they'll freak you out. And then you'll get to the bottom and they'll say, but the studies are inconclusive, or there's really needs to be more studies on it. So there's just seems to be a great deal of information thrown out there where people don't really even have the back, like peer reviewed studies
Hmm.
that, verify what they're saying. So I think there's a lot of fear mongering going on about it. Um, but at the end of the day, I think that it's important that people just really be aware of their own medical issues and, you know, make sure that they're keeping track of
How
what
it
they
affects
have
them.
and how it affects them. Yeah.
So, knowing that, and then moving forward, what are some things that you see people doing that maybe they shouldn't be doing? You talked about edibles a couple
Mhm.
times. You say what you consume,
Right.
which could be smoking or edibles.
Mhm.
What do you see people doing that is just they're not trained properly or they're not reading the literature? What are
Mhm.
people doing in general that they really should not be doing?
I feel like that the first thing that I would always suggest is if you can have that conversation with your doctor,
Hmm.
that you definitely let them know that you are consuming cannabis, that
Hmm.
you make sure that they're aware of the fact that you are experimenting with it, um, because they need to know that information.
Well, right now we're talking about medical cannabis. So it's the
Right.
doctor has already said, okay, this is something you may want to try.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, so here's the thing. Not all doctors can prescribe. And again, I'm basing a lot of my knowledge on the state of Pennsylvania.
Hmm.
I'm sure it's different. It may have varying degrees of guidelines.
Hmm.
What you get is the way I got my card was early on. I got my rheumatologist to actually write out a prescription for me, which
Hmm.
I then took to a medical marijuana doctor, and they just did a basic intake on me. And I've got to be honest with you, it was so basic. It was okay. You have pain, you have arthritis, you have Lyme disease, you have fibromyalgia, you have anxiety. You definitely are
Hmm.
qualified for this. And so they wrote me the permission to get the medical marijuana card. But the difference is that that doesn't always translate back to your doctor. So I always feel like one of the things that people aren't doing all the time is
Hmm.
being transparent with their doctor about the fact that they're experimenting with cannabis so that their doctor is aware of that whenever they prescribe them future medicines. Or if they happen to come to the doctor and say, I'm having all these issues, if they haven't explained that they're using cannabis, that's a
Hmm.
big, humongous gap that your doctor doesn't have when they're trying to help you.
Yeah.
Um, I think that to your point, edibles is a very good example. How many times I can't tell you, I've had conversations with people who are saying, I will never use cannabis. My friend gave me an edible and I had such a horrible experience, but no one told them, hey, again, you start slow and low. You should take a quarter of that edible and give yourself a little bit of time because it can take an hour before it kicks in.
Hmm.
But most people think that delicious little piece of candy is like, oh, it's so innocent and tastes good. And they just take it all. And then before you know it, they're laid out. Um, Luckily, you can never overdose on cannabis.
Hmm.
So that's actually a good thing. You may feel really bad for a long time. You may be having panic attacks and, starting to write your last will and testament, but you're not going to die. So that's the good thing about it. Um, so yeah, so I think that's people overconsume. They take chances that they shouldn't.
So you're talking about natural cannabis.
Right.
It has come to my attention that there's also synthetics
Hmm.
that a lot of teenagers are beginning to consume that are leading to a lot of these problems, and then it's getting blamed on cannabis. Do you know anything about that whole issue?
I feel like a lot of what might be happening is, so I think the synthetic things, excuse me, you might be talking about the Delta 8, which is
Hmm.
easily accessible. You don't even have to have a card to get it.
Yeah.
Um, I've not really heard of very many people complaining that they've had bad effects from that. Um, the thing that I always question is that all you did? You know, when
Yeah.
you're going in
I'm aware of
down.
several teenagers who were using it a little
Excuse
too
me.
much, like every day kind of a deal, and who eventually went into like a psychosis where
Right,
they had to be
right.
hospitalized.
Yeah.
And it all came back to that particular
Yes. Oh,
synthetic. And it's because it's synthetic and not natural, and the body doesn't know how to process it because it's all chemicals.
good point. Yes. Yes.
So,
And I wanted to go back to your question, I think that I didn't answer completely a
uh-huh.
minute ago. You just brought it up. The thing that I've heard is that a lot of adolescents,
Hmm.
um, whenever they eventually are diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder or schizophrenia, there has been a common reporting that they've used they've used THC, that they've
Hmm.
been consuming, and that sometimes people want to say that that has led to that psychotic,
Hmm.
psychosis. That's something I'm trying to study, and I don't know a lot about it, and it really concerns me. But the thing
Hmm.
that I always am trying to remember is that their brains are still developing, and I would argue that there's probably something going on chemically when they're
Hmm.
going through adolescence, and they're getting to that point that it just could be a perfect storm for those kinds of things. And
Yes.
whether or not
Or
they have a predisposition to a mental illness
mhm.
already, there's so many things that it could be. And that's why
Well, and
I
the
think
thing
it's
with
just,
that is that generally when you do have those types of ailments, they'll see early on when they start getting symptoms, they start self-medicating, which is
right.
usually drugs and
Yeah.
alcohol.
Yep.
So it's like, well, which came first, the chicken or the egg?
That
We
is a
have
good
another
point.
question. Um, Today, when I went to my doctor for a routine checkup, he had a question on his list as to whether or not I was using medical marijuana. Is there some way that MDs are getting guidance on this in Pennsylvania?
Ah, I'm not sure about whether or not they're getting guidance.
Hmm.
And that's also how a cannabis coach can be useful. um, because I've actually often thought about reaching out to local doctors,
Hmm.
because I know most all the doctors that I've spoken to have no clue, and they're not comfortable one bit at even talking about it. And the fact that that doctor actually had that on that list impresses me.
Yeah.
Um, which I think is pretty good, because that's not something that they usually are looking for. Um, so I don't I'm not aware, but again, I haven't done any research to see if there are any local programs on it. I would speculate probably not many, but I don't know. I don't have anything to back that up. But it's a good question.
So, how much about I guess, the history of cannabis do you think affects what's happening now so far as the way it was demonized and the way
Yeah,
it's been used over time and even the way it's used spiritually?
yeah, absolutely. So one of part of my program, the one thing that I tell people often about the Natural Wellness Academy is
Mhm.
that the assignments that I had to do to get to my certification,
Mhm.
every assignment I had was so beneficial to my future as a cannabis coach. So we didn't have any, um, I hate to say worthless lessons, because no lesson is worthless, but sometimes you get, things that you're told to do that aren't really relevant to you. That program, actually, everything that I learned was beneficial in a lot of ways. And one of the things that I learned, of course, is the basic history, that cannabis has been used since 2800 BC.
Mhm.
It started in Central Asia and Western China. It's been used for multitudes of things. To your point, you said earlier, sometimes sacred rituals.
Mhm.
Um, it's been used as medicine up until the 1930s. Um, it was not uncommon. My understanding is that you could go into any pharmacy and then on the shelf would be a bottle of cannabis,
Mhm.
tincture, not flower necessarily. Um, the other thing that I found really interesting whenever I was doing, as a matter of fact, when you and I met, some of the literature that I had there talked about the fact that as far as early as 1914, the $10 bill actually has hemp, because hemp up until the 30s was used for so many things. And it was a common plant that was used in so many different ways in our society that at some point they just started to demonize it, taxed it out of existence, basically. Then in the 1970s, they threw it on a controlled substance list. It's been downhill since then. And the stigma, which is why I'm at this point have named my cannabis coaching business Back to Nature, is because I've chose specifically not to use cannabis because
Mhm.
I wanted the people that I was working with to feel comfortable taking my business card and leaving it on their table and not having to worry about whether anyone saw something that had pot on it,
Yeah.
and that was my way of trying to make it easier and lower the barriers for them to feel comfortable interacting with me or going onto that website, and not having to worry about that, because there still is a big stigma out there. And it's every day that I consume and I use cannabis, every day I'm sad that other people, you know, aren't able to feel as comfortable, and
Are being
incorporate.
blocked from it, and that they've made the cost so high too.
Mhm.
I don't know if every state has, where it's so expensive to get your card,
Yeah.
and then the cannabis itself is so expensive,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then having, certain rights taken away if you have a card. Like in Pennsylvania, if you get a cannabis card, you cannot own a gun.
So I did not know that.
What? Like, what does one have
Yep.
to do with the
You
other?
you
If
can go get a
anything,
whole big bottle of
like,
whiskey.
everybody's more chill after they do cannabis, like,
Exactly.
you know? I could
Yeah,
see not drinking alcohol because that causes a lot of issues.
absolutely.
Cocaine, maybe, but
Yeah, yeah,
cannabis, really? You're gonna
yeah.
make this where people are not allowed, or their rights are taken away because
Right.
they're gonna use this medicinally? Like, what?
Yeah, and if you continue to do if anyone does just even a tiny bit of research on the benefits of cannabis, can see that it doesn't belong as a controlled substance that is considered having no medical value.
Mhm.
I mean, come on. I mean, it's so obvious. And even the other day, I came across a study. Well, there was a biotech company that has figured out a way to incorporate CBD um, into a hypertension therapy for
Oh,
people. So they're using it to lower blood pressure. And so, I mean, that CBD is used to help with seizures. It's very well known. I think it might be the one um, THC, or I'm sorry, cannabis related medicine that's actually allowed out there that I'm aware of.
well, and they tried to put the kibosh on CBD during, the C word the last couple of years because they found that people who were had that as part of their regimen or were using CBD therapy were not getting it. And when they did get it, they got rid of it a lot faster. And so it worked against it. So, of course, oh, we can't have any of that.
Right, right. Yeah.
So, we have another thing in the chat. It says, in high school, I had a job at a very old pharmacy, which still had a copy of a license to sell a list of drugs, which later were added to Schedule X and became controlled. Imagine what we would know about it now if there was
Mm.
ongoing research on the use of marijuana for medical purposes.
Uh,
Yeah, if
I,
people didn't
I
have to
cannot
hide it
imagine.
or go to Mexico to use it.
I cannot imagine really where we could
Yeah.
be right now. And that's one of the other things that I think about is that, there's this, I feel like, there's this big um, concern from the pharmaceutical companies that we can't have this natural plant coming in and fixing people. there's going to be a place for pharmaceuticals, and that's the one thing that I always tell people is that, don't immediately start experimenting with cannabis and thinking that you're going to fix your health issues. Like,
Hmm.
you shouldn't be coming to cannabis with a major health issue. Now, had you maybe been managing, your health along the way, because cannabis is supposed to be all about homeostasis. It's
Hmm.
basically the regulator of all of our systems. And the goal of cannabis is balance. So when you consume cannabis, the plant itself looks for areas in your system that are out of balance. And depending upon the strain and the terpene and the cannabinoid and all those things, it
Hmm.
will influence your body's homeostasis. And that's the goal of it. And to me, that's like a miracle plant, you know? Um, and the other thing that I wanted to mention too is that, the more I've learned, the more I would recommend people start with CBD,
Hmm.
um, because you don't have to worry about getting that mind altering high,
Yeah.
because you may feel a little drowsy. I would argue there's a chance that that's probably natural for your body. So maybe you're tired, maybe you need to relax. Maybe you're used to going 100 miles an hour, and now this plant is saying, okay, your body's way too up, so let's bring it back down. And it's safe, and you can get some really good CBD products without a medical card. Of course, they say that if you can get a medical card and you can get the CBD with a little bit of THC, um, that, from what I understand, it helps your body metabolize the CBD better. But if you look at the list of things that THC can help with and CBD, you have a long list of stuff CBD can help with. And you do have a long list of stuff THC can help with, but CBD pretty much hits the mark on most things that,
Yeah,
um,
I like CBD myself. I've had
yeah.
very good. Now, when we talk about CBD, I noticed that there are certain, I guess, brands maybe
Hmm.
that I tried certain things and did absolutely nothing,
Right.
like
Me
sugar
too.
pill.
Yep.
And then other ones where it worked really well.
Right.
So what is there something specific we should be looking
Yeah.
for authenticity maybe?
Yes. If you can find full spectrum,
Mhm.
you'll see it labeled full spectrum, broad spectrum, and then the other one is an isolate. So
Mhm.
basically, the difference is with full spectrum, what you get in that particular dose is the as much of the plant as possible. So what you get with broad spectrum is you may or may not get any of that THC, because most all of the what you'll get might have a tiny bit of THC, but it's under that, I think it's 0.03
Mhm.
level. Um, but what you get with CBD, that is when you get it the full spectrum, you're getting maybe those terpenes or maybe some other cannabinoids
Mhm.
along with that. But
Okay.
yeah, so with a broad spectrum, you're getting less of that full plant benefit. And then the isolate is just basically isolating what it sounds like. It just isolates that CBD out of it. And that may work for some people as well. So again, you have to experiment, but I would always recommend going with broad spectrum anytime you can do that. That
Broad
would
or
be,
full?
yeah. I'm sorry, full spectrum. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah. What advice would you have for people who are mainly looking for spiritual, not medical use, and are considering experimenting with different types of materials like ayahuasca and mushrooms?
Ah, that sounds like an exciting plan. Um, yeah. So again, I think that my recommendation would always be to make sure that if you're going to experiment with cannabis, um, you'll want to definitely know the strains you're using. And I say this because it's a very good question, because I attend a Monday night cannabis meditation. It's a group of people,
Mhm.
the most beautiful soul who runs this. We've all been meditating for about almost 2 years now,
Mhm.
online on Mondays. And the thing that we figured out early on was that if if you're new to cannabis and you're new to cannabis and meditating, you really want to definitely start off with small, low doses because dependent upon the breath work that you're doing, dependent upon the other things that you might be doing and experimenting at the same time, they can all be more than you're ready for when
Hmm.
it comes to trying to have that elevated spiritual experience. So again, I would argue that anything that you do, you should definitely start off slow and until you learn what your tolerance is and what you're experimenting with. I've not personally yet tried ayahuasca or I did try, I microdosed a microdose of psilocybin,
Hmm.
which I'm convinced, by the way, like everyone else in the room was definitely on full dose.
Yeah.
I was too paranoid, but I swear it changed my life. It was literally a microdose of a microdose. And that
Hmm.
whole week, I experienced a change in my mental health. It was amazing. So again, for me, I started off really slow and really low, and I understand what that experience is like. So I might feel comfortable going a little bit further, trying a little bit more, in the future. I hope that answered the
And
question.
as always, obey your local laws.
Obey your local laws. Yes.
Make sure that you have a partner that is there who can help if anything happens,
Absolutely.
and that you make sure you're in the right place in the right state and
Yes.
not doing things in desperation or doing things when you're so far off the deep end that this is going to drive you further.
Yes.
Especially when we talk about spirituality. I mean, we do this all the time. You really need to be very aware of who is around you so you can be aware of what is around you.
Right.
When you're looking to psychedelics and outside influences to your body, that can often lead to energetic changes. And if you're in the wrong state or around the wrong people, it can go very wrong very quickly. So be
Yes.
very, very careful. Use more
Yeah.
caution.
And
Yeah.
a good term for that that I learned was set and setting. It's it's the
Yes.
way that you actually configure your surroundings.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of people, more than I can even name right offhand, have always said that if you're experimenting with psilocybin, it's good to be outside.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
With nature.
yeah, that you're outside, and they'll give you a variety of reasons why that is, but
Mhm.
that's one of the recommendations, and to feel safe and to make sure that you've set your schedule up so that it facilitates you being able to go through that experience without, having to go to work the next day or, those types of things. Yeah.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
don't want to be driving a car or doing
No,
anything
that
like
might be
that.
bad. Right. Yeah.
Yes. Always
Yeah.
about being safe.
Yeah.
So, is there anything else that we should know, or any other like tidbits or words of wisdom? I think you saying that it actually brings in homeostasis. Like that's not something I didn't know that.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
think that should be on your next commercial. That's what I
Ah, thank you.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that was really good that it seeks out where the imbalances are, and that's where it goes.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
But it
it's there's have you ever heard the one ring that rules them all?
Yeah.
I always hear that in the back of my head when I think about cannabis because
Mhm.
it's the one system that rules them all in a lot of ways, and it regulates all of
Mhm.
your other systems. And it's amazing that we haven't known about this all these years. This is a new recent, you know, understanding that we've come upon. I'm just so excited about what else we're going to learn the more that, we open up
Or
and
rediscover.
yeah,
I'm gonna
absolutely.
say rediscover because
Absolutely.
we hide things if they don't bring enough money to the right people.
Yeah, yeah. I think one thing that I would say
Mhm.
is that I feel that it's made me a better mother. It makes cannabis has helped me to not be so high strung. It's
Mhm.
helped me to be more grounded. The insights I gain sometimes when I'm just sitting with my thoughts whenever I've consumed. I can't begin to tell you how many problems I've solved, not really trying to even solve them, but somehow or another, the wiring, I don't know if it's just the way certain strains affect me,
Hmm.
but I just feel like it's my quality of life. You mentioned fibromyalgia, all the things that come with that, the fatigue, the brain fog, the pain, the insomnia, all those things, the pain that I have with all the other things. I'm just very thankful for this plant because it has increased my quality of life, and I'm just hoping that I can help as many other people as I can, just to maybe potentially consider.
And how exactly would someone get in touch with you? And what does
Well,
that look like?
aha. So, email me at shellyeveland@gmail.com. I think you were going to put that in the chat.
Hmm.
Um, I would love to offer a half off of an hour session. And what that would look like is we would sit down. I can do phone, I can do in person, we can do Zoom, um, we can just do through email even. So I would try to get to know a little bit about what problems you're experiencing. I would learn about all the things about your weight, your height, your what medicines are you on, what's your lifestyle like, what are you looking for, what's your level of openness to experimenting. So I would do a basic inventory. We talk about some things that you would want to work on. And then the follow up that I would give with that consultation would be I would be willing to help people by looking at their local dispensaries.
Hmm.
Um, I also am trying to find through my own networks some very good, reliable, safe CBD distributors
Oh,
who
awesome.
test their products. I have one of my mentors in my program at
Mhm.
an NWA gave me the name of a farm that she goes to. So I'd be, one of the things that I would follow up with would be let me go and find some strains that you might want to experiment with, and maybe find some terpenes because that's the other thing.
Mhm.
You're not going to be able to necessarily find those strains all the time, but you can at least say, oh, I know I need if I need to focus pinene, you would
Mhm.
want a strain with pinene in it. If I need anti-inflammatory, you would want myrcene and caryophyllene. So I could at least say, here are some strains, and when you can't find the strain, here are the terpenes you can just go in and ask for. So
That's awesome.
do that. Yep.
That is
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, does our audience have any other questions before we go? And for our audience on YouTube, all the information to get in contact with Shelly will be down below in the doobly-doo. And we will have links to her website as well as having her email address and the special offer just for our viewers.
Absolutely.
Okay, I think we are done. So can you just one more time, the name of your website and your contact information?
Yeah. My website is Back to Nature, backtonature.squarespace.com, I believe it is. Um, Shelly Eveland at gmail.com. It's SHELLYEVELAND at gmail.com.
All right. Okay.
Thank
So
you.
with that, we're going to be signing off. Thank you very much for coming and visiting with us today. And hopefully you'll visit another time and we could like zero in on a topic.
Would love
But
to. Thank you for
this was really
having me.
helpful. Thank you so much, Shelley.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
I will. Now I need to unpin you. So it'll just be my face. There we go. This is Geraldine St. Joseph signing off. We were with Cannabis Coach Shelly Eveland, whose website is backtonature.squarespace.com. If you'd like more information, feel free to contact me or Shelly. The information is below. Have a great night and have a blessed, blessed week. Mahalo.